materias influenciables en extremo.
Influenciables en extremo. Influenciables en extremo.
Materias influenciables en extremos.
No, maybe we need a code of discretion. I don't want to understand everyone.
Materias influenciables en extremo.
Influenciables en extremo. Influenciables en extremo.
Materias influenciables en extremos.
No, maybe we need a code of discretion. I don't want to understand everyone.
materias influenciables en extremos.
Influenciables en extremo. Influenciables en extremo.
Materias influenciables en extremos.
No, maybe we need a code of discretion. I don't want to understand.
Bilbao alondigaren izenean, arratsalde on dizuela guztioi edo gabon, dagoeneko ez dakigu, ongi etorri Gutun Zuria jaialdiaren 5. ekitaldi hontara. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta 5ª edición del Festival Gutun Zuria, que como sabéis, este año analiza por un lado la relación que mantiene la verdad con la mentira y por otro invita o ha invitado a la literatura norteamericana. Nazioarteko politikagintzari buruzko hausnarketa interesgarriak entzun ditugu azken ordubetean, interesgarriak eta zalapartatsuak batzuetan ere bai, eta segidan Estatu Batuetako literaturaz arituko dira John Verdon eta Paul Holdengräber. Un apunte para mañana, me gustaría recordaros que a las 12:30 del mediodía se va a celebrar aquí en el atrio de esta Alhóndiga Bilbao un acto de firma de libros a cargo de John Verdon, Bernardo Atxaga y Hans Magnus Enserberg, al que lógicamente, acto de firma, al que lógicamente estáis todos y todas invitados. Bide batez, gure babesle nagusien BBKaren eta El Correoren laguntza ere eskertu nahi dugu. No sé si habéis estado en sesiones anteriores, todas son más o menos parecidas, dependiendo de la intervención de cada uno y de que respeten los tiempos. Son de cerca de 1 hora y el último cuarto de hora lo dedicamos a las preguntas del público, que por cierto estáis siendo muy activos estos días, por tanto, por lo que os toca zorionak guztioi. Ingelesez arituko dira datorren solasaldi honetan, beraz ez baduzu ulertzen, bat-bateko itzulpeneko makina horiek badituzue. 3. kanala da euskarazkoa, decía que la conversación va a ser completamente en inglés, por tanto, si no lo comprendéis, las máquinas de traducción simultánea os darán la traducción en castellano en el canal 1, 2 el inglés y 3 en euskera. Os recuerdo además que esta sesión, al tratarse de la última que se celebra este día, será un tanto especial porque tan pronto como finalice, a eso de las 10 más o menos, el propio John Verdon va a mantener un contacto cercano y, si queréis, hasta personal con toda la gente que estáis aquí, que estáis invitados, lógicamente, al vino que ofreceremos aquí fuera. Ayer, no sé si estuvisteis, era norteamericano el vino y tinto. Hoy va a ser blanco y de la casa, concretamente Chacolí de Vizcaya, Talleri de Morga. John Verdon will join a conversation with Paul Holdengräber about the lies we tell and the price we pay for them. Over 300,000 copies sold in Spanish of the novel Sé lo que estáis pensando, think of a number, have turned John Verdon into the latest great star of detective stories. Su personaje central, el policía neoyorquino retirado Dave Gurney, es también el eje fundamental de su segunda novela, No abras los ojos, que asimismo está recibiendo una acogida excepcional. Paul Holdengräber es licenciado en Filosofía y ex profesor de Literatura Comparada en Princeton. Es director del programa de Educación Pública de la Biblioteca de New York. Tiene un show propio online en el que entrevista a escritores y figuras de cultura internacional, que si lo queréis visitar, lo apuntáis, está en YouTube, Intelligent Channel. Please join me in welcoming John Verdon y Paul Holdengräber.
It's a real pleasure to be here with you, John. A pleasure to meet you here in Bilbao. And I'd like to begin with a quotation we heard before in a text I read from Philip Gurevich, who couldn't be here. I'd like you just to react to this sentence of Robert Stone. I don't know which novel it comes from, but listen to it. He said, "If I had no secrets, how would I know who I was?" Do we need secrets to look within our soul?
I think that secrets are so much a part of life. I think there's so much.
Do you hear? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I think there's so much a part of life. I think there's so much a part of what each of us is that I can't imagine what it would be like to not have them. I think that lies and secrets are not only human. I mean, I think that the ability to deceive exists throughout the animal kingdom. I think that we're particularly good at it.
Why?
I think it's a survival strategy. I think that when I think about what really is effective for survival, what really gets us what we need and keeps us alive, I mean, I think of just very few things. I think of sharp teeth. I think of fast feet. And I think of the ability to deceive. And I think that maybe unique to human beings is the ability to deceive ourselves. I think maybe one of the kinds of secrets we have. I mean, I think normally we would think about secrets we keep from other people, but I think in a way far more powerful in shaping our lives are the secrets we keep from ourselves. And I think there's always that tension. I think that part of living and part of coming to understand who we are and where we are, there's always that tension of trying to find out more about who I really am, but there's always parts of me that resist that. And I think maybe without that resistance, I just can't imagine what that would be. It seems almost inhuman.
Is there a tension, though, between secrecy and deception?
I think there's a difference, perhaps. I mean, I think self-deception is perhaps the most dangerous form of deception. And I think that there may be secrets that I consciously keep from people. There may be things about my life. There may be things about the life, for example, of a family. I think there are, I mean, it's a very typical place that there are secrets within families.
So a protective device.
Oh, yes. I think maybe it's the ultimate and most basic protective device, but like all protective devices, it has two sides. I mean, it's extremely effective, it's necessary, but I also pay a price for it. It's like the price I pay for lying. I get a short-term benefit out of it. I mean, I may be put in a situation where the simplest response is to dissimulate, to bend the truth, to make things a little different, appear a little different from what they really are. But when I lie to somebody to manage a situation, I pay a huge price in the long run.
What if you're not found out?
I think being found out is the least of the problems. I think one of the first and maybe the most pernicious of the problems with lying is that we hate liars. And I think that when I manage a situation by lying, I become a liar. And I mean, to me, the price is that I end up with two people in here. I end up with two people in the same skin. I end up with the liar, and I end up with the person who has contempt for liars. So there's that price.
But why is that a problem? Yeah, I insist a little bit heavily. If you're not found out and you're lying for an immediate benefit that might repeat itself many times, isn't that pleasurable and something that we might want to do as long as we're not found out? Do we not stop lying because we have been found out, and then we may go from lying to self-discovery?
I think that we often will stop lying in a particular instance or about a particular subject when we're found out. But that's a very different thing from abandoning the strategy of lying. And I think that whether I'm found out or not, there's an internal conflict. When I become the kind of person who I have contempt for outside myself, I think it's in the nature of a human being that we become uncomfortable. I think when I do what I condemn in you, something inside me becomes less comfortable. Now, I may not be aware of it. I may not be aware of it as the direct result of my strategy of lying. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that I don't become uncomfortable with my life. And it may pop up in symptoms that I don't identify as having anything to do with the lies I'm telling. I may become generally anxious. I may become hypervigilant. I may become slightly paranoid. I may become extremely defensive and may never connect that with my own behavior.
So was there a period where you felt that lying was all right?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely.
You look, I see in your eyes sort of a reminiscence of a pleasurable moment in your life.
Well,
because maybe not lying is less fun.
Not lying is certainly less fun in the short term. And I think probably like most children, many children, all children, I'm not sure. I certainly have recollections of lying about a lot of things as a kid.
And very early on.
Oh, very early on, very early on.
Lying begins
nearly
at birth.
Yes, as a matter of fact, if you watch small children carefully, I mean, 2-year-olds, I mean, you'll see pretty sophisticated deceptions going on. As a matter of fact, my wife and I have a 3-year-old niece, grandniece, I guess. And my goodness, she likes to go to the zoo. But when she goes to the zoo, there's a particular animal that she especially likes to see. And, well, it turns out that maybe it's not exactly the animal she likes to see. It may be the proximity of that animal's cage to an ice cream stand. And so, as this story was related to me the other day, she goes off to the zoo with her grandmother and goes to the special animal that's next to the ice cream stand, and then talks grandmother into buying her an ice cream. And then goes home that evening, and her mother comes to the house, and the mother asks the little 3-year-old if she had any ice cream that day, because that would be the decision point as to whether or not she was going to get ice cream after dinner. And she asks her, well, did you have any ice cream earlier today? And the little 3-year-old flat out says, no. And then glances over at her grandmother with a special little look.
Hopeful look.
Yeah, well, a hopeful, careful, wondering look, you see.
Will she be found out?
Will she be found out?
Will the liar be found out?
Will the liar be found out? And will even perhaps this little look that she gives to Grandma, will that be sufficient to silence Grandma? You see.
And the truth is probably not.
And the truth is probably not. Grandma says, well, now you know you had ice cream today. At which point the 3-year-old became quite irate, in fact furious, stormed out of the room, ran up to her room and slammed the door just to let Grandma know what she thought about that. Now, if you think about what's going on with that, I mean, that's a pretty sophisticated, complex lying situation. I mean, it seems like it's childish because it's about ice cream, but that's not the issue.
No, I mean, to me it's complex because of the glance.
Because of?
Of the glance to her glance.
Oh, yes, because of the glance.
That to my mind, is the most interesting part of the story, not the ice cream.
To me, too.
Not the animal.
Right.
But the glance.
Yes.
The fact that children so early on, and we learn this more and more in life as we progress, we learn to read faces.
Yes.
Detectives, which is your specialty.
Yes.
I like the way you look at me like that. Yes, where are you going now? Learn to read signs.
Yes.
Yes.
And they learn very early on what the signs mean.
Or so they think.
So they think, and they have sometimes a very careful web of deception and expectation.
A web of deception that they create?
Largely that they create, yes.
I'm wondering whether it mightn't be the moment to read a passage. I wonder if I should have you read it. Maybe I should. Do you mind? No. You might be able to contextualize it from here. One question I leave all the way to there.
I'm trying to contextualize this for myself and remember where on earth this appears in the book. This is a situation.
Very germane to what we're talking about.
All right. This is a situation where a character, there's a discussion going on in a spiritual retreat center, and where they're talking about issues of honesty and so forth. And the detective says, one question before I leave. I heard you ask Justin about something called internal dichotomies. I was wondering what that referred to. I'm wondering how that's being translated, but anyway.
They're doing their best.
Okay.
Sure.
Internal dichotomies has to be a stopper. I was wondering what that referred to. You don't miss much, said Mallory with a small frown. Dichotomy refers to a division, a duality within something. I use it to describe the conflicts within us. Detective says, you mean Jekyll and Hyde stuff? Yes, but it goes beyond that. Human beings are loaded with inner conflicts. They shape our relationships, create our frustrations, ruin our lives. Give me an example. I could give you 100. The simplest conflict is the one between the way we view ourselves and the way we view others. For example, if we were arguing and you screamed at me, I would see the cause as your inability to control your temper. However, if I screamed at you, I would see the cause not as my temper, but your provocation. Something in you to which my scream is an appropriate response. Interesting. We each seem to be wired to believe my situation causes my problems, but your personality causes yours. This creates trouble. My desire to have everything my way seems to make sense, while your desire to have everything your way seems infantile. A better day would be a day during which I felt better and you behaved better. The way I see things is the way they are. The way you see things is warped by your agenda. Detective says, I get the point. That's just the beginning. Hardly scratches the surface. The mind is a mass of contradictions and conflicts. We lie to make others trust us. We hide our true selves in the pursuit of intimacy. We chase happiness in a way that drives happiness away. When we're wrong, we fight the hardest to prove we're right. Caught up in the content of his program, Mallory spoke with verve and eloquence. Even in the midst of his current stress, it had the power to focus his mind. I get the impression, said Gurney, that you're talking about a personal source of pain, not just the general human condition. Mallory nodded slowly. There's no pain worse than having two people living in one body. Yes.
We lie in order to make others trust us.
Well, why else lie? I mean, I lie because if you knew my real agenda, you wouldn't sympathize with it. In fact, if you knew my real agenda, you might not even like me. If you knew my real agenda, you might run out of the room screaming. So I hide the agenda. I present myself in a way that I believe will be acceptable to you. In fact, I present myself to you in a way that will make you trust me.
There's a paradox in this, no?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. A rather big one.
What is it?
Well, the paradox, perhaps, is that we're constantly trying to achieve long-term ends with short-term means. You know, I want trust, but I want it quickly, and I want it on my terms, and I'll get it any damn way I feel like getting it.
But if I go that route, I might find myself quite alone.
Well, that goes back to the other sort of hidden cost of lying, and that is that see, lying is essentially a tool of appetite. It's a tool of desire. It's a tool
of passion.
It's a tool of my personal passion. It's a tool of getting what I want. And if what I want is intimacy, I'm heading up the wrong path. Because the only way I can achieve intimacy is through openness, and openness implies truth. Openness and lying are contradictory. And so often I think we search for intimacy dishonestly, and it makes it impossible to achieve it.
And so if we find ourselves in this situation, we find ourselves acting a part.
Yes, we find ourselves acting a part. I mean, if I present myself to you in a way that isn't honest, well, what am I doing? I'm showing you this sort of fake picture. It isn't
a facade.
A facade. It's not me. I've made this up. You see.
But you really think there is you?
Oh, I think there is me. I think, however, that the me is so full of fear and so full of smallness that I don't want anyone to see it. And so I characterize myself in a way that I think you will accept, that I think you'll be comfortable with, that I think you'll trust, that I think you'll like, maybe that I think you'll love.
But surely someone who loves you knows this smallness in you and has in some way found you out.
Ah, yes, yes. In fact, maybe in a way, the best indication of a deep, loving relationship is that each person has, to some extent, found the other one out and loves them all the more. I mean, that's the ironic thing in it, I think, and that is that very often when we reveal the part of us that we're most afraid to reveal, it's exactly that connects us with somebody.
somehow what you mentioned there reminds me of a sentence of Saul Bellow, who said that one doesn't love because, but in spite.
Yes, and there's another quote I rather like, which is that we are brothers not so much in our virtues as we are in our defects.
And is this an attraction, the quotation you just mentioned, is this an attraction you have for the mystery detective story? Is there a connection between the hidden and the necessity for unveiling, for peeling? There's a character who feels like he's peeling onions. So, you know, in a way, unearthing, peeling, being an excavator, being not unlike Schliemann, the 7 layers of Troy, or Freud thinking that he's unveiling the 7 layers of consciousness. And your detective, somehow through an attentive gaze that doesn't let itself be unfocused, unveiling the truth of characters who try to deceive. My question is finished.
Yes.
Say more.
Yeah. I think that there's something about the whole so-called detective genre that I think it resonates with a lot of people. It certainly resonates deeply with me. I think detective stories are broadly popular. I think in many cases people may not know why it is they like them as much as they do. I mean, I've thought about it a bit in my own case. And I think it has a lot to do with detective story being a basic metaphor for something much larger that happens in our lives.
Metaphor how?
Well, okay. A detective story is invariably 2 stories. I guess I tend to think of it, I mean, you mentioned Schliemann, but I tend to think of it in terms of the buried city. In a detective story, there is the buried city. And I think the buried city is the criminal enterprise, you see. Whatever the bad guys are doing, whatever it is that's buried, whatever it is the deception is. And then there's the story of what's that all about? What's the criminal doing? How's he doing it? What's the motive? And so forth. And then there's this second story. And the second story is the story of the excavation of the buried city. And the excavator is the detective. And
so he's like an archaeologist.
He's like an archaeologist. And the other way I see it sometimes is in terms of foreground and background. And in the background, you have the buried city. In the foreground, what do you have? You have the detective with his motives, living his life with his own entanglements and problems and issues. But he's also trying to solve this crime. And I think that one of the things I think that characterizes us and makes us feel a certain way about a detective story is the way the 2 parts of it resonate. I mean, just for an example, there's a Icelandic writer that some of you may be familiar with, Arnaldur Indridason. And in his stories, I love the resonance between what's going on in the detective's life and what's going on in the horrible crime situation. Different writers will create stories with a different kind of resonance between the detective's issues and the criminal issues.
And when you say going on in his life, you mean in his personal life?
Yes, exactly. And I think in a way, in those instances, it's almost as though the detective's life, his own issues, become a bridge to the deeper, more horrible story. So there's something about that structure and the structure of uncovering the hidden city that works for me. And the reason I say that is that my first novel was published just a couple of years ago. Right? However, I had started a half a dozen novels from the time I was 25 and, until I was in my 50s. And I always abandoned them.
Why?
I abandoned them because they were kind of a free-form structure. I would start with an idea that attracted me for some reason. And I would write 20, 30, 40, 50 pages. And it seemed like the energy disappeared out of it. And it wasn't until I started putting things into the detective form that finally the energy continued. And I think the reason is that the metaphorical structure of the search, the metaphorical effort to strip away deceptions works for me. It means something to me.
It's interesting you use the word strip.
Yes.
Because as I was reading you, I felt that the detective's work is not unlike the work of a stripper. Slow. It's all about speed and
Yes.
Slowly hinting.
Yes.
Little clues.
That's certainly the way I do it, yes.
All right. When you use the word metaphor,
Yes.
And the energy lost in the early drafts.
Yes.
It is true to say that you are a late bloomer.
Very late.
Very late bloomer.
Yes.
Gives us hope.
Yes.
A late bloomer in the craft of writing.
Yes. By the way, I'm 70.
You're looking good.
Thank
but,
you.
So you're a late bloomer in a craft that certainly usually attracts people much earlier.
Yes. Oh, it attracted me earlier. I just wasn't any good at it earlier.
Before doing the craft you now are devoting your life to, you worked in the advertising world.
Correct.
And relate to me a little bit what that world was about when you were in it. And who were you then?
Well, you should really ask my wife.
I'm asking you.
I started in the advertising business back in the Mad Men days. I started back in the advertising business when nobody was sober after lunch.
Was this your case too?
Oh yes. No, I was the leader of the non-sober group, and I suppose looking back on it, it was a strange, chaotic kind of business. I mean, I can't imagine this kind of thing happening these days, but I remember when a fellow hired me for a particular position in a particular company. He hired me at a very lovely French restaurant in Manhattan, and we had just finished 2 bottles of wine, which had followed 2 martinis each, and we were having brandy afterwards. And I was thinking at the time that this is the damn wonderful company to be joining. And he told me that there were limits, however. He said, this is a work hard, play hard kind of company, but there are limits. You can't transgress. And I was curious about the limits. And he said, well, never throw up on the golf course. And I thought to myself, so that's the limit, huh? And the only reason I mention this is that that's kind of the way the business was in those years. And I fit right in. And I coasted along in that business and actually did reasonably well in that business. Became somewhat successful in that business. And it's an odd thing. You know, one of the things about having written these books that's particularly pleasing to me is that my children are very proud of them. My children are actually, you know, quite almost middle-aged people now, but my children are quite proud of these things. I never showed my children an ad I wrote. You know, I did it for many, many years, and by the way, I don't criticize the industry at all. I made the choice to be in that industry, and I did what I did.
And you made the choice to leave that industry.
I made the choice to leave that industry, and both choices were, you know, came out of my life for various reasons at various times. But I just found it sort of interesting that, you know, I was in my late 60s before I did something that I could show to my children and say, you know, look at this.
Do you think it would be natural for you to think that from all those years of hard drinking, but also of working in the ad business, some of it found its way into your style of writing?
I don't know about that. I suppose being in a business where you're writing a lot, day after day after day for many, many years, I suppose it sharpens the craft, and it may sharpen your sense of the language, and it may sharpen things. Actually, the contribution that I think the advertising business makes to my writing is the recollections I have of the dynamics of the people. I mean, in the advertising business, very typical to be sitting around a table with, you know, 9 or 10 or 12 people, and everybody's got their own agenda, and they're all very smart, and they're all maneuvering. And that dynamic, that group dynamic, is a fascinating thing, and I think in some ways that's crept into different scenes in the novels.
You were talking about the fascination or interest one might have in the detective story, and I know that Nabokov at one point talks about literature as that what gives you a tingle in your spine, and you say what gives you that tingle is goose flesh.
Well,
what is goose flesh? I wonder how they're translating that. It's a good one.
That would be interesting, yes.
I mean, describe the, because you're interested in that moment when your skin...
Well, I'm interested in the moment. I tell you the moment I'm most interested in mystery stories. And, well, let me start with the moment I'm least interested in. I really don't, and this may seem odd, I really don't care much how they end. The ending to me is not all that important. What I really like is the moment at which the viewer, whether it's the detective or, you know, the surrogate for the detective, whatever, when they see something that isn't quite right. You know, it's the first indication in that world that something is amiss. And I guess the example, the most obvious example, the one that always comes to mind is the beginning of the David Lynch movie Blue Velvet, where I guess it's Kyle MacLachlan who's playing the young hero, and he's walking through a path in a kind of woody area, and he looks off to the side of the path in the grass, and he sees a severed ear laying in the grass. And that's, you see, in a way, that becomes the tip of the buried city. It's that little sense of, oh my goodness, something is terribly wrong.
Something is out of place.
Something's out of place, you know. I mean,
and so the detective is a person who
starts digging. Starts digging. Something there isn't quite right, and the detective essentially is trying to...
An ear or a nose or a limb should not be there.
It shouldn't be on a garden path, no. And so the detective starts gathering facts and starts trying to make a pattern of the facts. Connect, yes, connect the dots, but always trying to make sure that there are enough dots to connect, because it's a natural human thing that we connect dots. The problem is that very often we're connecting too damn few of them and coming up with a much too detailed picture from too few dots, which is essentially what paranoia is. You
quite naturally have a love of Conan Doyle,
yes,
and have said that for anybody who would engage in your craft, they should read as many times as they possibly can The Hound of Baskervilles. And in The Hound of Baskervilles, Conan Doyle writes that the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes.
Yes.
Have you to comment on that? And I like the notion of obvious. While you think about that, there's a commentary by Errol Morris in a book called Believing is Seeing, where he writes, nothing is so obvious that it's obvious. When someone says that something is obvious, it almost seems certain that it is anything but obvious, even to them. The use of the word obvious indicates the absence of logical argument, an attempt to convince a reader by asserting the truth of a statement just by saying it a little louder.
I think the problem with obvious is that things that are obvious to me may not be obvious to you, and vice versa. I think that obviousness is a very subjective experience masquerading as an objective one. I mean, if I say something is obvious, I'm suggesting that every reasonable person will agree on its nature, and this is absolutely untrue. I think that, see, there's a basic problem with rationality. I think that this rationality business is grossly overrated, and the reason is that there's an illusion I think we have that reason is an objective process, an objective faculty,
but
instead it's not. I mean, the basic fact is that I don't even like the word reason. I don't even like the word rationality. What I think is a much more clinical or accurate term for it is calculation. You see, I think what we're really talking about is the ability to calculate. We're talking about the ability to see probabilities, the ability to judge angles, velocities. How does this situation project itself into the future? What's likely to happen? I mean,
so for a detective, that would mean following footprints.
It would mean following footprints. This is calculation. Now, the problem, however, with calculation is that if you think about where it came from, where did it come from in evolution? It came as a tool for achieving, for satisfying appetites. In other words, creatures learn to calculate because the gene constellation that enables that creature to catch the rabbit more easily.
So it came from the world of hunting.
It comes from the world of hunting. It comes from the world of appetite, and it's inextricably bound to that. I mean, my so-called reason was created by my appetites as a tool for satisfying them, and I think it remains that. So what I think is totally reasonable is almost invariably shaped by my desires, by my desire to have it be a certain way. And I mean, that's perhaps most obvious in the world of addictions. If you look at the logic of a drug addict or an alcoholic, in terms of their reason and their rationality, the way they see the world, it's quite bizarre. But I think there's a continuum.
Bizarre why?
Because what is so obvious to them is so counterintuitive to the observer. I'll tell you.
Meaning it's a hyper form of self-deception.
It's a hyper form of self-deception, but it's on a continuum with all of the other self-deceptions we have. So it's not as though, oh yeah, addicts have a problem with self-deception. I mean, I'll give you, if I may, a personal sort of example. And in a way, this sort of plays to a number of things, because one of the themes that creeps into these books is fathers and sons. And in the first book, it's an issue both in the detective's life, and it's a pretty serious issue in the murderer's life. So this father and son thing is another thing that works its way into this thing. But let me tell you about this way of seeing things that can be quite bizarre. My father had a huge drinking problem. My father was a pretty obvious alcoholic, and it was a considerable problem in our home growing up. And I remember instances that were quite strange, I guess, or at least strange to people who aren't familiar with this sort of thing. But I think I was about 15 or 16 years old. And I think I came home from school one day, and my father was in the bedroom. My father was a binge drinker. He wouldn't drink for a few weeks, and then he'd go out and drink for 2 or 3 or 4 days, and eventually, come staggering home with no clear recollection of where he'd been or what had happened. And then he would sober up, sort of, dry out, I guess you'd call it. So that day I came home from school, and he called me into the bedroom and wanted me to stay with him. And he was, when my father would be withdrawing from one of his binges, he'd see things that weren't there. And commonly, it was almost something he was used to. One of the common hallucinations he would have were spiders coming out of holes in the wall and dropping down on him. And he'd had these hallucinations often enough that he was aware of the fact that it was a hallucinatory experience. But he would still be jumping and trying to knock the spiders off him. So he knew they weren't there, but by God, he saw them. And he would also he would be scratching his skin because he thought he had little ants under his skin. So I was sitting there with him, and he was sweating and shaking and batting spiders away. And I had to go to the bathroom. I went into the bathroom, and when I was in the bathroom, I heard him shout, and I went back into the bedroom. And he said to me, "Oh, God," he said, "thank God you came back." I said, "What's the matter, Dad?" He said, the frog was killing me. I said, "Well, what frog?" And then he explained it to me very carefully and in a strangely logical way. He explained that there was a 200-pound frog, and the frog had sneaked into the bedroom, and when I left the room to go to the bathroom, the frog jumped up on him and sat on his chest, making it very difficult for him to breathe. With very big frog. And when I came back into the room, apparently the frog was afraid of me. And so the frog hopped, or whatever a 200-pound frog does, back out into the hall. And my father begged me to stay in the room because he knew the frog was afraid of me. And if I left the room, he was in danger of suffocation because the frog would leap back on him. Okay. The reason I tell you this story is that is to follow it with just one statement, and that is my father didn't think he had a drinking problem. Right? Now, you might say it was obvious that a man who hallucinates regularly and is in terror of 200-pound frogs has a drinking problem. But he didn't think so. Why not? Well, because the company he worked for had a fairly generous sick leave policy. And my father had never lost a day's pay as a result of his drinking. So the fact that he would occasionally be home battling giant frogs didn't count because he got paid. Now, the point of this is the power of selective focus, you see.
Which is so important, again, in the life of a detective.
Yes. The problem with selective focus, though, is that it's very easily driven by our agenda. And hopefully the detective, or at least the metaphorical role of the detective in at least my books, and I think in most detective stories, the metaphorical role of the detective is objectivity. Now that
Uncovering. Uncovering.
Uncovering and searching for the truth, but doing it in a way that isn't infected with a totally warping agenda. Yes. I mean, selective focus is part of life. We have to, selective focus is necessary. I walk into a room, I look at the people. I don't start counting the rug fibers. So selective focus is perfectly normal. The problem is that selective focus gets bent by agendas.
What is so interesting is the way in which, and I'm wondering to what extent the books are nearly immediately autobiographical. In this passage of Think of a Number, you write, "My father drank too much. It was a difficult thing. Even when he was there, he wasn't there. But shooting a stranger wouldn't have helped much. So what was the point of talking all that shit? The point is what happened. The hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean?" And so you have, in both books, you have your relationship to your father so clearly enunciated.
Yes.
Without much mediation, as it were.
I think the relationship with my father appears in these books a lot. To some extent, to a lesser extent, the relationship with my mother, but very often, frequently, the relationship with my father. Sometimes, as you say, without mediation, it's mentioned in a very straightforward, simple way. It also exists in the books, I think, though, in a larger metaphorical way, and that the books are, again, efforts to uncover the truth. And my father was a very elusive man, and I think maybe a lot of my writing has to do with the search for understanding who someone is.
Elusive in the sense that he didn't say very much to you. He didn't talk to you.
My father...
and when he did talk to you, it would seem that he lied to you.
Yes. I think my father had an extraordinarily difficult life. And I think the way he dealt with his past was to refuse to talk about it. I think the way he dealt with his past was to cut it off pretty much completely. I don't know anything about him. I used to ask my father again and again when I was a kid, Dad, or, when I was a little kid, Daddy, tell me about when I used to say, Daddy, tell me about when you were a little boy. Tell me about when you were a little boy. And And he never would. He never would tell me anything about his childhood. And finally, one day, I guess I had been pestering him and pestering him and pestering him enough so that one day he tells me this story. And the story is that he said, well, you know, I had a friend and we used to go out and we'd take our slingshots. And my father was born in Ireland back in the very early 1900s, 1906, I think. They would go out, he said, we'd go out with our slingshots into the fields out in back of the house. And he would describe the stone walls and how they would follow the little rabbit trails and how they would set snares to catch the rabbits and climb over these walls and so forth. And I would listen to this as though, I don't know, as though it was some kind of gold, you know. It was an incredible sort of thing, you know, a great gift.
And as if this was a moment where he would reveal himself to you.
As though, yes, as though now finally I was seeing, you know, he was finally answering the question, you know, Daddy, what was it like when you were a little boy? And I used to think about that story when I was a kid, you know, when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I would see an ad for a slingshot or something, you know, in a sporting magazine. I'd want to buy a slingshot so I could go out in the field and I could be like my father was when he was a little kid. And that went on for years, and that story was so vivid in my mind. And then one day, I guess I was I don't know exactly how old I was. I'm imagining that I was probably in my late 20s or something. And I visited my father, and I said to him, for some reason the story came to mind again, and I said, you know, Dad, you know, remember the story about hunting for the rabbits? And he looked at me sort of blankly, and he said, what? And I said, remember, you know, with the slingshot and going out in the field and following the little trails? And he just looked at me kind of sideways, and he said, oh, that was all bullshit, I made that up. All right. Now, in the context of a different father and son relationship, an incident like that might not be a big deal. In my life, it was
huge.
It was the only thing I knew about him. You see, it was the only thing I knew.
The only thing you knew about him was
a lie.
A lie, a deception.
Yes.
And where was the urge, do you think, in him to present that to you? That as perhaps the only tangible story you had about him.
I think it was impossible for my father to talk about his childhood. My father came from a very strange family. When he was born, his father was 69 and his mother was 19. I used to ask him a lot about them because they were my grandparents and they never came to the States from Ireland. And he only told me two things, one short sentence about his father and one short sentence about his mother. About his father, he said, he was a hard man. End of story. And then on another occasion, I asked him about his mother, and he said, she was a cold woman. After the age, his mother lived until his mother died when my father was 56. He hadn't spoken to her since he was 16. I once asked him, Dad, you know, do you ever want to take a vacation back to Ireland? And he looked like he was going to vomit. So you ask, why did he make up the story about the rabbit? I think he made up the story about the rabbit because it was better than anything true he could possibly talk about.
As we wind down, I was particularly intrigued in preparing for this conversation today with you, that back when we were both back in the States, you sent me a graduate paper that you had written as a graduate student in, I think, social sciences, sociology, something of that nature, which has the title The Developmental Effects of Being Enrolled in School a Year Younger Than the Standard Age, a Speculation on the Transgenerational Transmission of Alcoholism. And I was wondering, why did you do this, John? Why did you send me this academic, but rather revealing portrait of yourself? What is it that you wanted me to know? Did you feel that you needed me to be armed with this in order to speak with you, that you needed to show me some truths about yourself, that this piece would help me understand?
I think over the years, Paul, I've come to value openness. And it seemed to me that that particular piece, it was appropriate for a number of reasons. I think I felt it was appropriate because it deals with the secrets and lies issue. And I suppose the simplest answer is I wanted you to know who you were talking to.
And I feel that having read that piece, which could have been just an academic exercise, gave me an insight. Mm-hmm. What you describe in it, because we won't leave people not knowing the little bit I know from reading this piece, what you describe is a terrible error you could have perpetuated for a very long time. You think you found out the truths of this situation, but the error being that your mother sent you to school, to primary school, to first grade, a year younger than most children. And she told you that she was sending you to school earlier because you were incredibly intelligent.
Yes. Yes.
And you
which was fine with me.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, it was fine with you. But in the piece, you're actually not. You're talking about the fact that it wasn't really fine with you.
I know.
You were not particularly happy to be viewed as so intelligent.
Right.
But it was a story. It was a mythology of the family that was perpetuated, and that you probably continued to believe in for a very long time. After all, you had very good grades. You did incredibly well. You were smarter than most of the kids. You were also isolated by that fact. Mm-hmm. But then you found out, much like a detective might, the truths of the matter. What did you find out? What did you find out, and what did it make you understand? And I think in a way, this is the seed of the stories that come here.
I agree. I think in a way, and I think maybe it's certainly not a unique thing among writers that we build books around, not necessarily around our literal experiences, but we build books that replicate our experiences metaphorically one way or another. And as Paul said, my mother had enrolled me in school a year early, and the mythology of the family was that not only was I supposed to be extraordinarily intelligent, but the mythology was that they were all extraordinarily intelligent, you see. And there was another oddity about it. You see, where I grew up in a part of New York City where the way little children played was that the mothers would take them downstairs, and the mothers would sit in these little lawn chairs, and the children would play in a field, and the mothers would sit there and watch them. Well, the problem is that my mother would never take me out because I would ask her why not. And she'd say, well, I can't do it because, I'm much too busy. I'm much too busy, and and I don't want to sit around with those women. All right? Well, it turns out that wasn't the issue. The reason she went back to work a year early was that my father was a drunk and got fired and didn't have a job. And she had to work to make up the difference. And the reason she wouldn't sit with the other women in front of the field...
They might find out.
They might find out.
They might spread rumors.
And they might know things about my father that she didn't know, because my father was a very obvious and very active and very difficult sort of drunk in the neighborhood. And so this whole mythology of the family ends up being, in fact, almost the opposite of what it was supposed to be. And I think, in a way, you know, getting to the truth of these things, it's always a bit painful, but I don't think the alternative is any better.
Thank you very much. So we will take a few questions. As I'm in the habit of saying, questions can be asked not the way I ask them. They can be asked in about 52 seconds at most. And they should be good questions. Don't be shy.
It's okay if there are no questions.
There can't be no questions.
Okay.
Let's wait 1 more minute. Not one question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.